I guess.
Yo, ready for this?
Dun, dun, dun,
Just
dun,
the
dun,
same
dun,
thing.
Okay.
Get all your wiggles out before. Oh, gosh, you guys remember doing that? Be like, all right, get all your wiggles
Everyone
out.
stand up and get your wiggles
Whoa,
out.
whoa, they're all out.
Adults
Yep.
need that too.
True that.
Yes.
Hi, and welcome to the Body Smart Book Club, where we talk about the best of what we read. Today we're going over the first little bit of Chapter 4, pages 116 to 129.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, I did read it, I promise. So pages 116 to 129, which is all about monitoring your training. Before we get going with this, Preston had a kind of a funny story this week.
Oh, yeah. So, as you all know, COVID-19 coronavirus has gotten rid of most races these days.
Has it?
Yeah. If
Wow.
you've been sleeping underneath a rock, then just to let you know, that is happening right now. Wear a mask. Anyway. Last week there was a race that was going off, the Nebo half and marathon, and I had just learned about it a few days prior, and it was kind of a last minute like there's a race, I have to do it, there's not very many of them going on, so I quickly signed up and was stoked to do a race. Mostly I was kind of back and forth on whether I still wanted to do it, just because I'm in a pretty heavy training block right now, so it's kind of just going to be an afterthought kind of thing. And so packet pickups comes around on Friday, and you have a whole whopping 8 hours to pick up your packet. So I wasn't tapering at all. Like I said, it was a big training block. So I trained in the morning and then had some things going on in the afternoon, and it was 3 o'clock. So I slept 4 hours, closed at 7. And I was like, I'm going to take a little nap before I go down. 3 hours later, I wake up and I have an hour till packet pickup gets over, and it's on the other side of the valley, over an hour away. So I completely missed packet pickup because I took a nap and slept way longer than I ever anticipated sleeping
How long
for a
did you
nap.
sleep for?
Over 3 hours, which usually a nap is like
Dang.
20 to
That's not
30
even a
minutes
nap,
for me.
that's just a straight up sleep.
Yeah, like that's half of a night of sleep. So I completely missed packet pickup. Anyway, I did my own half marathon race the next day, and it went really well. But it would have been nice to have it in an actual race.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Well, sorry that happened.
I love that you, like, one of the things you said in there, you're like, I was going to do this, like big training block just as an afterthought, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know, like, it's kind of a throwaway phrase,
No
but
offense to the race directors and Nebo.
but like, no, I think that's cool, right? Because it shows what a certain level of training can do, and kind of like we talked about last week, like being able to build fitness to a level where like we can do the things that we love when we want to do them. And so it's not like, oh my gosh, I just have to have this huge mental workout and I gotta like, oh man, like I haven't been doing anything and I want to run this race, but am I ready, right? Like because you train consistently, you follow those principles that we talked about last time, right? The continuity, the gradualness, the moderation in your training load. You're able to say like, hey, this is something that I want to do, and it could be an afterthought, right? Because you'd already trained to a level that like that was something that was in your repertoire, right? That you could just kind of, do on the whim, on the fly. And Another thing that I liked, right, is that like, hey, this opportunity wasn't available, right? Like the circumstances being what they are, all these races have gotten canceled, and like I still did my half marathon, and like. For you, like I think huge shout out to you, right? Like your 100 mileage coming up this weekend, and I remember talking to you when that race got canceled, and like you were super bummed, right? You put all this training in, and like, oh man, like it feels like this is for naught. But threw together resources, right? Like talked to friends and family, and have gotten this whole race together for you and Jacob. Like that's. You just kind of, I don't know, talk a little bit more to that. Like, I know we talked a little bit last week, but yeah, just.
Yeah, well, I'm actually really happy with how things have turned out. We were incredibly bummed when the race was canceled. We didn't get a refund, and that kind of stinks. But
100-mile races are not cheap.
no, you're not.
Yeah.
But we look at it now, and it's like, it's okay that we didn't get our money back because we still like invested that money, and it was more about making that commitment to run 100 miles. And the way that it's turned out is so fun because, like Mark said, we've recruited friends and family to come help us out with it. And we're so excited to like run to friends and family to each aid station and just to be surrounded by people that we love the entire time. I think that's going to give us an extra like leg up,
Yeah.
if you will.
Like that.
And it's just been really fun, like mapping out a course. I've never mapped out a course before, especially a 100-mile course. So it's just been fun, like exploring the mountains with my husband and mapping things out. And it definitely has added an extra challenge to running this race, but it's been fun, and I feel like it's going to make it a little bit more rewarding.
Yeah.
So I'm happy how it turned out. But I actually wanted to ask you a question too.
The plot thickens.
With you know, I haven't done a lot of racing because I get so much anxiety. It freaks me out. I love to run, but the races freak me out.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, with all the racing you've done, it kind of sounds like you found a spot where you don't get anxiety anymore, or how do you deal with the anxiety before a race? Like, what are your thoughts there?
I definitely still get it.
Yeah.
It's something that you adjust to it a little bit over time. But for me, I actually get the most anxiety when I'm doing races that are close to home because there's like people that are going to see me racing.
Oh, yeah.
But when I go to like big international races out in the middle of nowhere, I usually have no anxiety because like, oh, it's just me here. Like, I don't have anyone to answer to. But at the same time, it just comes down to one, being confident in your training. Just making sure that if you put the work in, it's the best you're going to do. And then just, for me, I always tell myself, whatever happens on race day, I know I'm going to try my hardest. And no matter what that result is, if it's the best that I could do on that day, it doesn't matter if it ends up being last place or first place. I ran my hardest. And so you can't expect anything different than that.
That's awesome.
There's no such thing as a bad or a wrong decision. You make the best decision you can for that question that's presented to you, whether that's racing or what to do during the race, and you live with the result of what it is. And that takes away a lot of the anxiety for me because it's, you know, I have confidence in myself that I'm going to try my hardest, and even if that means not running very well that day, I know that I did everything I could to get there. And for me,
awesome.
that helps a lot.
That's awesome. That's really good advice.
We were having a conversation. It just reminded me, conversation earlier today, and just this idea that, like, kind of like you said, like, I make a decision, and if it turns out like I didn't make the best decision, right, or it didn't turn out quite the way I wanted, that's okay,
You
right?
just
Like,
learn from it.
you learn from it, and then you can make a different decision the next time, right? Man, I trained this way, and I reflect on it, and maybe this wasn't the best decision, and so I'm going to change that in my next training cycle. And like, you can constantly improve, and you're running a constant experiment on yourself. And like, from that perspective, I think it becomes a lot easier to like deal with what we typically call like failures or mistakes, because they're just like the way that you improve yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's so easy to look backwards at a decision you made and be like, oh, that was the wrong decision. But you don't have the information. You didn't have the information then that you have now. And so if you're in a certain situation, you're going to make the best decision you can based off of the information you have. And so it's obviously super easy to look back in retrospect and be like, oh, like I wish I'd done this instead.
Yeah.
And that realization there is the reward from making that decision. Being able to know in the future, like, now I have more information for the next time I make that decision.
Yeah. I love that.
And so I think that's what's important with training and with everything. I've gone through a lot of injuries, a lot of setbacks, and looking back, it's easy to like pick out like, oh, I did this, and this wrong. But at the time, it was, I am very dedicated. I'm going to do this. I'm going to train hard, and I'd done the best I could in that situation. But looking back, obviously, that wouldn't have been the best way to go now that I have the information that I have now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's super awesome. And a lot of that ties into what we're going to be talking about today with monitoring your training. So I guess we'll just jump right in here. Yeah. Monitoring your training.
So it's just interesting with what you said. Like, you brought in that huge mental component, right? Mm-hmm. To like how does my training and how do things feel based on my reaction to it? And that like what, you could go down the route of like, oh man, I'm a terrible runner. Like I'm never going to do this again. I'm going to stop training versus like, oh yeah, like that was okay. I can do better in the future. And so like recognizing that performance is a combination of so many different factors. Training is a combination of so many different factors. And I think being able to look not just at kind of like those physical markers of training and of fatigue, but looking at like the mental markers, right? How are you bringing stress? How's your way of thinking affecting your training? So I guess maybe like the best way to dive into it is, I guess, what were some key points that you guys really took from the chapter, or what really stuck out to you?
Let's see. Well, I really like this. So during training, you naturally explore the limits of your body, and that includes, well, that's going to include stepping outside of those bounds sometime. And it kind of goes back to what we're talking about, I guess messing up. So pushing yourself too hard. And that just comes back to realizing, oh, it's okay. I made a mistake. I'm not going to make that mistake again. But I just love that concept of exploring the limits of your body. I feel like that is a big part of running, especially mountain running. Like, where can you take your body? And it really just takes time on the trail and with your body to learn how to push it and how to take care of it. And that really is what this is about. And like you said, there's so many things that we need to keep track of. How we're feeling, all the numbers, heart rate, VO2 max, the miles, the hours on the trail, just so many things that when you keep track of these things, you can combine them to figure out what works for you and your body.
Yeah, definitely. I really love, so something you said, it reminded me of one of the things that he said in kind of the beginning of this chapter. Mm-hmm. So he said, thoughtful application of sound training principles accompanied by attentive monitoring always results in the best outcome. And so really, I think one of the big central themes of this book is becoming an educated runner, learning enough about how the energy systems in your body work, how to best adapt training load, what's happening when you're applying load, and doing that all in the context of your own body systems, and really being able to tune in and key into what your body is telling you moment to moment, day to day, really learning yourself. And so taking the principles and then building a training plan, a recovery plan, a life plan that fits you. And that's one of the things that I've really, really, really loved about that book. That's 3 reallys. Super good.
Wow.
Very important.
So important. Is because, and we've talked about this before, we actually dove into it a lot last time, is there's a lot of like, this is the best training guide and this cookie cutter approach, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, here's your training manual for a marathon or a half marathon, mm-hmm. or for this type of trail run or for an ultra marathon or whatever it is, right? Oh man, this is so nice. I don't have to think about it. Here's my plan for me and this is my age and I'll do it. And it's just not enough. Like we talked about before, it's a good starting ground, but like, it's so individual, right? There are sound training principles that can be applied to everyone, but that are very adaptable to circumstance and physiology, and so being able to understand those really well means that you can build a custom training plan for yourself. And so you can certainly use those different guides as a great jumping off point. But understanding those concepts, those theories is really going to be the best option in the long run. That's, again, so much of what Killian talks about, right? Like I've trained all my life, but I was always interested in the why, chasing the understanding of how this is affecting me, how these things are working. And like, that's really what prompted him to make this book was, like wanting to kind of let other people in on what his experience had been and like sharing with the world what had been helpful for him, and like how his training was maximized when he understood some more of the why of it.
That's awesome. You put that really well, I think. One of the things that we can monitor is fatigue. And what I got after reading this is fatigue is like a Sour Patch Kid. First they're sour, then they're sweet. And I thought about a beginner runner who just completely ignores fatigue. And it becomes your enemy when you ignore it. You try to push through it, and then it takes over your entire life. And then all of a sudden you're in chronic fatigue. You feel horrible, injury after injury after injury. But a more mature athlete is going to be friends with fatigue. It's going to listen to fatigue, and you're going to stop when fatigue tells you to stop, or you're going to slow down when fatigue tells you to stop. So basically, fatigue, if you listen to it, is your friend. If you ignore it, is your enemy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's funny. I actually had a conversation earlier with someone today. They're saying like, hey, like, what do I do? Like, I feel like running is just so hard and I just don't really love it. Like what's the deal? And like, what am I doing wrong? Mm-hmm. And we talked through a little bit about what their training had looked like. And it was that zone that so many people get in that we've talked about before is training at too high an intensity, right? Like, oh, I have to feel like I killed it after workout, right? Like I have to be dead. And I'm just doing that day after day after day. And I come to find out she wasn't really leaving a lot of time for recovery. But it was really funny because she said, it's really interesting because, yeah, like when I have like some time between when I do my runs, I actually feel a lot better, which was cool in two sides. One is it really proving that point of having enough time for recovery and like not going at too high of an intensity for too long. But the other point, which I think is more important, is recognizing those things in our own life and our own training. I think we all want to go to like the gurus, right? Like, oh, here's the running guru and they say this, and here's the lifting guru and they say this, and rely on someone else to kind of like hold our hand along the way versus like finding people that can give us good information and teach us how to listen to our bodies, right? It's kind of that, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish principle, right? That versus like having to be the go-to person for every question and the perfect guide is like being able to teach those sound principles that people can rely on throughout their lives without having to constantly be like, oh, am I doing it right? Did I do it wrong? Or,
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why these cookie cutter training plans don't work, is the fact that everyone's recovering differently and everyone can absorb that training in a different way. So if you're all following the same thing, athlete number one may be recovering just fine from the first workout and be able to bounce right into that second one and the third one and so on. But athlete number two could be struggling with that. And so I think it becomes increasingly important to be able to find ways to remonitor that recovery, to be able to understand how your body individually is reacting to these training, the exposure to training that you're doing. And so things through like heart rate variability and understanding over a certain amount of time where your highest heart rate is and where your lowest heart rate is and how that compares to different times in the past with your training and what your resting heart rate is, and these different biomarkers that you can look at that are good indicators of where your body's at when you're recovering. And then understanding that fatigue isn't the same in every single instance. The book dives into this and talks about these three different areas that fatigue can influence us. And one, coming from the muscles, two, coming from a neurological standpoint, and number three, coming from an overall energy standpoint with how much ATP we have stored up within our muscles, and really just recognizing that each of these have their own ways that you have to address them to be able to fix that. So like if we're talking about a metabolic standpoint with how much ATP our body has, that's going to come very largely from our nutrition, what we're eating, how we're replenishing those things. Whereas when we're talking from a muscular standpoint, you're talking about having this calcium accumulation that's inhibiting the contractile forces in your muscles, that that might come down to more some of these modalities that we might talk about with massage therapy or or A-stem or compression boots or things like that that'll help kind of reset those muscles and get them ready for the next workout.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Or from like a neurological standpoint, maybe you just need to turn your brain off. Maybe, I know we've talked about this before, maybe your body feels fine, but your brain is just sick of it. Maybe you need to cross train, or maybe just take a couple days off of running.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so cool to be aware of those different systems, because then it's easier to pinpoint where the problem might be. Because I think it's so easy to just be like, oh, like I ran too hard, or I did, I don't know, like, versus like, whoa, boy, look, like, let me take a look at my nutrition.
Yeah.
What am I eating? And how does that factor in? And like, am I eating differently when I'm stressed versus when I'm, doing this activity versus when I'm doing this activity? How is my sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or again, like, how am I managing stress? Like, have I taken enough time to just kind of decompress and taken the time to relax and to play? Or am I always on? I have to hit this thing and then this thing, and I have this and this. And so I like that idea of, it is a lot to balance. But again, like, I think it goes to the point that like, it's not just any one system that's necessarily fatigued, right? It's generally a combination of all of them. Which means that we need to explore a variety of strategies in our recovery, and that no one individual strategy is always right for any one person, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's effective for one person might not be effective for another person, or what's effective for one person at a given time may not be effective for them at another given circumstance, and vice versa, right? Like, what was ineffective in some context may be effective in another context.
Yeah. No, those are good points.
It comes from realization as well that when you think about your training, and at the very beginning, you were saying that you related, some people just relate all their fatigue back to, what did I do for my run? But in reality, we're running for less than 10% of our day. If you're running 10% of your day, that's like 2.5 hours of running, 2.4 being 10% of 24 hours. And yeah, there's your math lesson for the day.
So pause. I was like, man, how did he get so accurate? And I was like, oh, yes.
You just move the decimal point. Yeah. And so, when we're looking at that, we have over 90% of our day that are different things that are also factors going into our energy levels. And so more often than not, look into those things as well. What's your life like at work? Are you sitting all day? Are you on your feet all day? Are you able to eat at work? Like, are you so busy throughout the day you just skip lunch? Are you up late stressing about this deadline you have to hit at school, or socializing with friends that you aren't getting the proper sleep? I would say most of the time, obviously your running is a big indicator and a big influence on your energy levels, but I would say your life outside of that is just as big of an influence as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. Killian talks about the importance of having a training log, and he said that he's developed the habit where after every single workout he does, he just writes a brief, this is what I did, and this is how I felt. And he said he does the same thing after every race, and he writes down what worked and what didn't work. And I feel like that is just such a great, simple way to do it. You don't have to get all crazy caught up in the numbers, and you keep track of your heart rate variability and your resting heart rate, and you keep track of this and this and this, and you have all these spreadsheets. There's a lot to keep track of, but if you try to keep track of it like that, that's just going to overwhelm you, right? So I feel like that's just such a nice little way to just quickly, this worked, this didn't work. This is how I felt today. This is why I think I felt this way.
Yeah. Well, so I love that last part, right? Like, this is how I felt, and this is why I think, right? Again, diving into some of the causes. And man, I really love that you put that, Preston, put that training into perspective, right? Like, this is only this much of your day. So what are you doing the rest of your day to either increase your advantage or to decrease your advantage? Like, that's, I don't think we typically think of that. And so, like, training has to necessarily include a consideration of all the other things that are going on in our lives, because they make up the majority of the time. And so, yeah, I love that component.
So it does matter. You can't run off a bad diet, and you can't sit on the couch all day and watch TV, even if you're running 2 hours every morning. Sorry,
Yeah,
but that's how it works.
I think that's all
That
of us at
hit
different times,
Preston.
right?
Yeah, I am the active couch potato. That's actually my nickname. So.
Oh
Oh, I
man.
love it. Well, so I'd love to hear from both of you. I know that your training has kind of been different, and the way that you go about it is a little bit different. We've talked about some of the different ways that we want to look at recovery. We've talked about training logs. Let's hear some real world examples of how you guys approach recovery, how you approach training, how you approach tracking, and kind of the why of how you do it.
For sure. Do you want to start?
Sure, yeah,
Okay.
I'll dive into it. There's a lot there, and so I'm trying to figure out where I want to start.
I was born in the year. No.
Yeah. So with training and recovery, obviously you're going to be wanting to be measuring the amount of work your body has done and what kind of recovery your body needs to respond to that level of workload. And so it comes down to one, like the way that you're measuring your workload, whether that be measuring how many miles you run or how much time you're on your feet, or your heart rate variability through that time. How high is your heart rate? Where's it at? And where's it at throughout the day, not only in your workout, but surrounding that workout as well. And so I personally like to measure I like to do mileage, and part of that is just from, I guess, my goals with running in general. I've always been a big fan of, finding the limits of the human body. And for me, one of those limits is how far can the body go. And so measuring it in mileage, although there are several points that go against using mileage as your key indicator for how much work you're doing. For me, it means a lot because that is one of my goals of how far can my body go at this given pace? And so measuring it in miles for me makes a lot of sense. It also is a good way to be able to compare workouts across the board from different times. So like if you're running like 80 miles a week one week, and then later on, a couple of years later, you can compare your training loads. Okay, like I did the same speed workout and stuff this week, but I was only able to hit this much volume of work. You can compare it back and forth. Whereas if you're to measure with time, that's pretty variable. One time if you run 2 hours this day and 2 hours another day, that can be two completely different workouts. And the same thing can go with mileage. Like obviously if you're running 10 miles and 10 miles, one can be at race pace and one can be at recovery pace. But and that's why keeping an active journal of your training is really important with that.
For sure. And that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes on there, and
Yeah.
I think tracking your recovery is just as important. Making sure that, especially when you're going into those taper weeks and those times when you're cutting back on training a little bit, I think both from a mental standpoint, being able to stay in that consistent schedule of training the same amount of time really helps me to be able to bounce back afterwards, get back into it. Because sometimes, after you've cut back mileage and then you get back into it, and it's like, oh man, like all of a sudden I'm doing all this work, and mentally it's just so exhausting because I'm not there for the time. But if you may not be doing that 15-mile run on Saturday, you might be doing like a 8 or 9 mile run, but take that amount of time and you would still be training there to focus on that recovery aspect.
That's great advice.
Use that to do some strength training. Use that to take an ice bath or get a massage or something that's going to better you as an athlete.
I like that a lot because in that way you're still kind of in that habit of devoting that much time every week to your training. Even if you're not running, you're taking care of yourself. Because I think as soon as you back off of your training, all of the extra space gets filled with stuff really fast. So it's good to keep that space open for your training. I like that a lot.
Yep.
And I guess my approach is very different because I'm not up there where every single second for me counts, right? My races are about just finishing, and I take a pretty intuitive approach. I mean, I watch my heart rate pretty consistently, and I just kind of listen to my body. I mean, if you haven't noticed yet, I'm just huge on listening to your body. So, I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. And I didn't really grasp this concept until I trained for this 100-mile race. I was very type A, all about this is a program. We're going to stick to the program. We're going to keep track of these numbers, keep track of these numbers. And I learned, especially for a race like this, it just doesn't work that way because of all the factors that go into how you're feeling. And anyways, so the way I've approached it is, you mentioned your training program is based off of a certain amount of mileage every week. The way me and my husband do it is a certain amount of hours every week. And I think it's important to keep track of both things. Our main thing is hours because I like it because we train the same amount of time every single week, but we can adjust every run according to how we feel. So every day we run 1 hour, and maybe in 1 hour we run 8 miles, or maybe in 1 hour we run 5 miles, depending on how we feel. And I like that because it keeps us moving and it keeps us honest with our body, and there's no pressure to hit a certain mileage. We're just going to go until our time is up. And that has also been really convenient with the amount of climbing we do and with the terrain we're on. Every single mile is not, like, the miles aren't equal. Every mile is a little bit different. So that's worked out really well for us. And I kind of developed this pattern of, again, just listening to my body. I get to a certain amount of time, like in the beginning, I was running 8-9 hours a week. And then that's when I could kind of feel, okay, my body is starting to break down a little bit. And so I maintained that 8-9 hours a week until I felt stronger and I could bump it up to 10 hours a week. Then once I felt comfortable there, I bumped it up to 11 hours a week until we were able to comfortably run 12 hours a week. And again, that it just all comes down to listening to our body, slowing down when we need to, picking it up when we feel good, and watching our heart rate.
Yeah. And that comes back to a point, the nature of how you measure your workouts. A point in the book where he's talking about as a mountain athlete, because of those hills and that varying terrain and that every mile isn't created equal, that measuring it by time would be more efficient that way. And it makes sense, I come from a track background, racing long distance on the track, and Melody was on the track as well. But as far as like she was a sprinter on the track, and so when she
was in high school, I never did it in college.
And so when it comes to like her experiences with long distance running, it really started with like on the trails, and so it makes sense, that'd be your approach. And I come from where like a road athlete may measure most of their training based on how many miles they run, and so we're kind of coming from two different perspectives there. But both come back to the fact that, it's really keyed off of your body and how you're feeling with the amount of load you're putting into it. And that's something that I really liked in the book, is that we had these 3 different versions of fatigue, of tired, with your muscles, your neurons, and your energy levels. And it specifically outlines different things you should and shouldn't do to treat each one. And I don't know if we want to go through each list.
I
think we should.
I think that'd be good to take a second to go through that, because
Mark, take it away.
Yes. One of the things that's really common from the muscular perspective, right, is the concept of DOMS. So delayed onset muscle soreness. Typically peaks anywhere from 24 to 72 hours after exercise. So that can definitely be a thing. And what that's telling us is that maybe we need a little bit of a break. So we don't want to just be like, oh, well, I'm just going to, my muscles are feeling that. Well, I'm going to punish them so they learn, right? That's kind of the wrong approach to take, right? So we still want to keep our muscles moving, but go more on that, give it some like light, low impact activity. Walking can be really nice for that. We're still moving them, but we're not putting them through that punishment. One of the nice things is that we get this adaptive training effect that is, as we've trained more in a certain style, right? Whether it be like we're doing strength training or doing, sprint running or more endurance-based running. Over time, our body adapts, and that like kind of post-exercise muscle soreness tends to go away over time. We can still experience it, but massage can feel really nice on those muscles. But again, just kind of like that idea of a little bit lighter, low-impact activity, but keeping those moving. when we're going to the kind of neurological fatigue side, that kind of like deady, missing heavy and dead, that kind of like heavy dead feeling.
I like that though. Like I'm feeling really deady.
My muscles are feeling deady. I'm still alive, but a little bit deady. Yeah, and so that again, things like massage can be helpful. Ice baths can be nice, right, to kind of give that nervous system a shock. Other things that cause some sympathetic calming, right? So being able to ramp down that sympathetic nervous system, so that can veer into some of the meditative, journaling, reflecting things, right? Kind of give your mind and your body a break. Again, low impact things like cycling, etc., can be nice, but we want a chance for that nervous system to calm down a little bit. And then last, the energy systems, right? And we talked a fair amount about that. But again, that really looks into some lifestyle factors. What is the quality of the food that I'm taking in, and how am I taking that in, right? Like, am I binging all of my calories, like late at night when I'm watching Netflix, or am I trying to, give myself those healthy bursts throughout the day? And so, that's not saying that you just have to like trash your whole diet and start over. That's ultimately probably going to be ineffective. Like we talked about last time, right? Making those huge changes doesn't always work, right? Making those small 1% changes over time tends to be a lot more effective. But just being able to take an honest look at where we're at and what are some little tweaks that we can make to improve that. What's the quality of our sleep? And are we getting enough sleep? So typically, so it's funny, you're like 3 hours and that's like half a night's sleep. I'm like 6 hours of sleep.
My first thought was like, how long do you usually sleep?
I sleep 1 second a day. So typically what bears out in the research, right, is when we're younger, we tend to need a little bit more sleep. Older, those numbers drop a little bit, but staying kind of in that 7 to 9 hours range and trying to get at least a minimum of 7. And being able to get those restorative sleep effects that really have a big bearing on performance and fatigue throughout the day, that really can't be neglected, and that's probably too often is neglected, right? Again, we look at, what happened during the run, and like, what's my sleep like? What's my quality? And how is that impacting me day to day? And so just kind of some general things to be aware of in each of those.
Yeah. I just want to say, I think it's important to get those things figured out. So get a good sleeping schedule going, get no matter where you are with your food, try to improve that just a little bit, and just feel good about how you're taking care of yourself before you bump up your miles and before you make a really, really big goal like running a marathon or a big ultra race. Because if you're trying to train for a big race like this on top of trying to figure out your sleep and your eating patterns, and it's just going to be too much. So try to find a good spot with yourself before you make a big goal like that.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
No, I agree. Again, I think just taking time, doing an honest evaluation of where you're at and where you want to be.
Right, right. I guess be realistic with it.
And adjusting your training based on what you find there.
Yeah.
The first step is realizing that there's something wrong, something needs to be changed. But if you're not making the actual change within your training, you're not going to get that the benefit from that realization.
Yeah.
And so being able to measure that stress, both from the realization that there's these outside stressors that are having issues, or measuring the stress that's coming from your training and being able to adapt things to make it work better for you.
Yeah.
And so things, we kind of covered some of these at the very beginning, like your resting heart rate and your heart rate variability, being super important, and good indicators. I don't think any one is my resting heart rate is this, so that means I need to do this workout. They're all indicators. Take all of these things as one piece of the puzzle. And as you look at all of them with a holistic view, then you'll get a better idea of where you're at, both on how you're feeling and the physiological signs that you see within your body, like that resting heart rate. Two of the tests that they gave on here I thought was really interesting.
That's good to point out.
Yeah.
This step and stare test, it's almost like a mini workout you do when you wake up. and you measure your heart rate based on that workout, and then it gives you a better idea of how your body's responding to a workout as opposed to just where your heart rate's at in general.
Sure.
So this first one, I can remind me which one's which, but the step test, essentially you're going to be stepping up and down stairs for
Just like one
60,
step
yeah,
up and down.
60 to 70 seconds, it said. And it doesn't really matter how fast you go. The main thing is that you're consistent through each day, so that variable isn't changing.
Yeah.
And you just get your heart rate up to, you don't even have to get it up that high, like 50, 60, 70, 80. Just get it a little bit elevated.
Yeah. So as long as it moves up, you're moving, you're getting exercise, and really just if you're moving at that same rate every single day, so say you're taking 60 steps a minute, what's your heart rate when you're doing that sort of an exercise? And then that shows how your body's responding to work that day. So you have another good indicator of what you should be doing for your actual planned workout for the day, and whether what you had planned is going to be too hard or too easy, and you can adjust accordingly without already having driven all the way to the track or having driven to that trailhead or already invested time into what you're doing. You can get a better idea beforehand and be able to adjust that way.
I like that. And just like really quick, concise of how that goes. So you're going to step up and down one step for a minute, get your heart rate up to between 50 to 70 beats per minute. And then you're going to take what was your max heart rate in that time, then sit down for a minute, and then take what your heart rate is after you rest for a minute. And that's the test.
Yeah, and we want to be able to look at that recovery heart rate and like how your body's doing that. So I think that's great, right? It's nice to have kind of a repertoire of check-in tests that are really simple and easy to do, but give a good idea of where you're at over time. So I really love that. One other thing, I know we touched on it a little bit. Let's hear about what are some recovery strategies that each of you like, and why do you like those?
Okay.
You want me to hit first on that?
Sure.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just kind of take you through my training routine and what I do post-workouts on an average day. I mean, obviously it's going to vary day to day based on time and what resources I have available to me, but when I finish a hard workout, the first thing I do is I get something to eat. They recommend something that has the ratio of 3-to-1 carbs to protein, roughly 30 grams of carbs and 10 grams of protein. And for your post-run snack, something you eat, that should be sufficient. And my goal with this is generally 30 minutes between after the workout, just because in that window your body is in a state where it readily absorbs nutrients really well. And so if you're able to get that in sooner rather than later, it'll have a better effect on your body. After getting something to eat, generally I like to do some sort of range of motion stuff. So whether that be in the gym lifting or whether that be on an easier day, just doing some range of motion drills, different skips, jumps, squats, things like that are just going to take my legs through the full range of motion and get me kind of a cool down that way. And then afterwards with that, I will generally spend some time either foam rolling or using some compression devices, whether that be just putting on a compression sock or using like the compression boots that Normatec or any of those other brands, Air Relax, Rapid Reboot have out that I really love, because you can just sit there and I can take on my active couch potato roll and just throw on Netflix and be recovering at the same time.
Yeah.
It's
You're
super
like, I'm
awesome.
being productive right now.
Yeah, I know. I love that. Like, I can sit there and I can be recovering, but at the same time, like, running isn't on my mind. I can get that mental relaxation as well.
That's awesome.
So,
Well, for me, I'd say my number one recovery technique is just to move. I don't have a ton of time. I mean, time is a myth, right? I need to make time for things that are important. Recovery is important. What I like is to just move throughout the day. So I'm pretty diligent in like watching my Fitbit and getting up and moving once an hour and getting my 250 steps every hour. And if I can walk somewhere, I like to walk somewhere. And I think just by implementing that, just trying to move and walk more and get up once an hour, that has had such a big impact on recovery and on my performance. So I'd say that's my number one thing, is just moving more. I I also love massage. I'm also a massage therapist. I mean, a big reason I went to massage therapy school so I could get massages. They just, I
please.
just love them. I don't,
Massages
I
are
talk to a
wonderful.
lot of people who are like, massage is my thing. And I'm like, are you even human?
No, seriously. Like, this is like one of the best things ever, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, seriously.
So
Massage
massage is definitely a big one. And something that we do at Body Smart is ASTIM, which is Instrument Assisted Soft Tissue Massage. And we have this little scraper tool, and we scrape people's legs up, and it's incredibly painful. But afterwards, it feels amazing. Preston actually just had it done right
Yes,
before we filmed this.
do.
I had one of our partners scrape my legs out today too, and it just... Oh, I love it. Like, it's horrible. Like, I cried. Okay, I didn't actually cry, but I wanted to. And it's so painful. But afterwards, it just, like, my legs just felt fresh and clean and light again. So I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, both of you. It's really nice to hear those couple of different perspectives, and that, again, kind of putting into action the principles of this book, right? That you understand the training principles, you understand the need for recovery, but you go out about it in different ways, and that it's effective for each of you in your training, in your life, and for your mindset. And so I really like that. Another thing that I wanted to point out that I really loved in your discourse was like how respectful it was, right? Like, kind of that idea of like, well, this is how I do it and this is how I do it, but being able to come together and find common ground and find the positive in each other's point of view. I think that's a really important thing to kind of point out and draw attention to, because I think that was an excellent example of you doing that, of being able to have differing beliefs, but respect those beliefs and understand why others might approach it from a different angle, because that allowed you to create a really solid place of common ground and be able to have that shared experience that can be beneficial to all of us and to our audience as well. And so I just really wanted to point that out and thank you for that, because we all have differing opinions. We all have had different experiences with exercise, with running, different life experiences, but those can all be valuable. And when we find a way to bring them in respectfully, I think that's all for the better, and it definitely, we all grow from it.
Yeah.
For sure. I think it is a good example of just different levels, different techniques, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it goes to show as well that not one modality is the best thing to use for every individual. Obviously, Melody has her ways of recovering. I have mine. I'm sure Mark has different ones that he likes as well. And scientifically, all those things have varying results and things that people have seen. And if we're only focusing on one, we're missing out on the benefits of using the others as well. And so whether that just be psychologically or whether that be an actual benefit to anything physiologically. And a lot of these modalities have been shown to have a very large mental aspect to it. And so whether that be, just that placebo of, okay, I'm putting this effort into recovering and this is going to make me feel better the next day. And so you have this positive outlook on your next workout because of this time that you spent focusing on your recovery.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because the placebo effect isn't a bad thing. I think that we kind of take that principle and it's like, oh, well, it didn't, bear out any significance, right? So let's just throw it away. And it's like, well, no, there's probably a lot of placebo effect in a lot of the things that we do, right? Yeah. In many of the things we do, there's probably at least a little bit of that component. But I think that really ultimately shows us the power of our neurological system and the effects, often profound, that it can have on our experience of pain, on our stress response, those quote unquote mental effects. I think it's easy to be like, oh, that's all in your head, but our brains are controlling what's happening in our body, and so those mental effects can be really powerful, and they can be powerful for good, and they can be powerful in a negative way. And so I think just not necessarily discounting some of the recovery things that don't necessarily have all the evidence, but that for certain individuals can be particularly helpful and not harmful.
Yeah, if it's helping them and it's not hurting them, why say anything? Let them do what helps them. And if it's not hurting you and it helps you and someone's like, yo, why are you doing that? You know, it helps you. Keep doing it. Why stop, right?
Yeah. So,
kind of the last thing that I know I wanted to touch on, I don't know if you guys have anything else, is just this grading your workouts.
Yeah, I definitely wanted
that
to.
is like,
Being honest with yourself with where you're at and how each workout goes.
yeah.
A last little thing, kind of add to your training log in your journal per se. With that is being honest with how you felt during that run, and so that you can look back in future and see, like, this is how my body responded to this, so you can better predict and better plan workouts and training in the future. And so they do it based on a general, like, kind of the grading scale you use within a school system: A, B, C, D, and an F. So
Why not
A
E?
means you felt like Superman and had plenty in the reserves. So that's like that workout where it just feels effortless and you're flying along and you don't think you could ever get tired. Love those days.
Those are
Oh, yeah.
bomb.
And then moving down to a B grade means it was a good workout. You completed the task with no problem. And so I think for me, just seeing the difference between that A and B just says that, if B is like you had no problem doing the workout, like A is going to be pretty rare to give a workout an A, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The C grade means you did the workout but felt flat or off. And then D means you could not finish the planned workout or had to reduce it. And F means you could not train that day due to fatigue or illness.
Yeah.
And what does he say? He said that if you're mostly getting A's and B's, that's great, you're doing something right. He said if you start to see C's or D's, or if you have 2 C's in a row, he said that's when you need to stop and reevaluate your program.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, it kind of goes back to those principles of, gradualness and moderation.
Exactly.
That like, we're not hitting it too hard for too long and being able to step back and modify, right? Like, maybe this was our goal, but like, for whatever reason, right? Like, there's so many factors, again, like we talked about, that went into training. Like, that's probably not a realistic goal, but we can still shoot for somewhere close to that goal. But just like being okay with modifying our training. And again, going back to what you both said, just being realistic with ourselves and being real about where we are and how we're feeling on any given day. And I love the idea of that grading system, and like not just putting a grade to it, but like putting the experience with it, right? Like writing that grade out and saying why we felt that way. Because like you said, it's really powerful to be able to look back on that in your training log and be like, okay, this is what I was doing at this point, and this is how I felt. So what do I need to do to be able to recreate that? Or what am I struggling with that's causing me to feel this way that I did previously? I think it can be really powerful in helping us to make those little adjustments that we need to make as our training progresses.
For sure. I agree. I really love them too. Well, how about we hop into our questions here? Anything else that you guys want to bring up?
That's great.
One thing.
Yes.
I know I will not talk about it for long. Just a quick brush over. I know last time we said we'd talk about Tim Noakes' central governor theory of fatigue. And so just kind of a real thing. And so just in the past, there was several different things that, we kind of thought, this is what causes us to finish, right? This is what causes fatigue, right? Like that kind of myth of the lactic acid buildup that we've addressed in the past, or any number of different kind of theories. This one's held together really well, and it's the idea that our brain acts as a central governor, so that like it never lets us get too far away from homeostasis before shutting us down, right? And so whatever kind of system is causing the fatigue, whether it's that muscular, neurologic, or energy systems, it all results in the same thing. It slows us down so that we don't move too far out of that homeostatic comfort zone that we want to be with. And the nice thing about that is that fatigue zone is really highly trainable, and the idea is that like we're pushing the boundaries of that often enough, and again, like you've brought up several times, Preston, within our body's ability to absorb that load, we're having those deviations away from homeostasis, and that the more often that we do that in a correct training plan, the more out of that area that we can get before our body shuts us down. And so it's a really nice way to look at fatigue, and that, again, speaking to that point of there's not any one process that causes it, but that it's an outcome of our brain deciding that we need to slow down to preserve itself.
That's so cool. I love talking about these concepts because it makes me feel like I'm such a powerful being.
You
like,
are.
Wow, my brain and my body does so much.
Yes.
It's so smart.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's jump into questions here. One question we got was, he mentioned somewhere in the book to take as a recovery technique, you can take an ice bath 12 hours after a workout or ibuprofen 12 hours after a workout. And the question is, why wait 12 hours after a workout to take ibuprofen or have an ice bath?
Yeah, I know like vitamin, I'm just going to speak to this point. I know vitamin I is like such a thing, right? Especially in the running world. I don't love it. It can be really effective, and I'm not going to knock it, right?
Occasionally.
Yeah. But the problem is that, yes, it can be. It's very effective for pain and for inflammation, especially in certain circumstances. But it causes systemic effects, and because of the way that it acts, it can also cause things like stomach irritation and some other things. And so I prefer ice baths, right? If you're going to do, or just ice in general for inflammation. It's local, it's easily controllable, and it's not causing those systemic effects, right? It's not having any, right? Your liver, your kidneys are not having to process it. It's occurring directly at the site. As far as the delay, I'm honestly not sure why
I'm not sure why either.
Calling the 12 hours. Do you have a...
Yeah, I kind of think it comes from the fact that your body's ability to bounce back from workouts and recover and rebuild those tissues is a process that needs to be trained. And if your way of training it is by taking ibuprofen and diminishing all that inflammation instead of the body's natural process of recovery, I think you're losing some of the progress that you're making from that workout. And so I think if your initial response to every workout is to just take a bunch of ibuprofen and jump in an ice bath, I think you're losing some of the benefit from that.
And you become reliant.
That makes
sense.
That's actually a really good point. I think we demonize inflammation more than we should, right? Like inflammation is our body's natural process to help heal us. I think where we run into problems with inflammation is chronic inflammation, and specifically chronic systemic inflammation. And we found that can be from metabolic causes, right? That's one of the, behind several of the different metabolic diseases. More recent research has shown some like chronic low-grade systemic inflammation. Similarly with long-term stress responses. And so I think like recognizing that in those initial stages, right, like inflammation can actually be helpful. It's our body's way of trying to repair, get those necessary chemicals, get blood flow to those area, take the damaged cell components out and replace them with new things. And so like our body's meant to have that response. And so we can certainly, I like that, like waiting a little bit, let those body systems kick in, but then also adding in something like the ice or the ibuprofen for some of that inflammation relief, some of that pain relief, and to help as a recovery. So it really is an aid or as an adjunct to recovery versus like forcing, like this is what has to be done. I really like that perspective.
Sense.
Yeah, and we've hit this quite a few times, that the active recovery is super important. And so for me, like the ice bath and the ibuprofen is a second line of defense. Like if it's something you need to take to, I guess, numb down the pain enough to be able to get that active recovery in, then I think it's important. But if you can do without, and you can just go straight to that next active recovery, whether that be your easy run the next day or whether that be, just moving throughout the day, I think that's going to be your first line of defense, and maybe use that second tier, that ibuprofen and ice bath, if that's what's going to allow you to be able to have that movement as well.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, awesome. Way to pull together and answer that question, guys. All right. Well, quick shout out to our sponsors. Shout out to the Utah Running Shop. Shout out to Ochre to Stansbury Trail Series by Jimmy Thomas. And shout out to the Wasatch Run Club.
Yeah, that's my running group. We meet every Wednesday to go run together. It's a non-competitive atmosphere. Come out and just have some fun, run with us, and check out our website, wasatchrunclub.com. We post all these videos on there, as well as a bunch of other awesome articles and things you can learn from. It's all free. And check out our Facebook group, Wasatch Run Club, on Facebook. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening. And next week, we're going to go over pages 129 to 149. If you have any questions about this vodcast or from this week's reading or next week's reading, go ahead and comment below. And we would love to answer those questions for you in our next podcast. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Sweet. Ooh, 4:59. Nice.
We did it!
All right,
Bye.
wow.